This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
At least 69 people killed, a village destroyed in the latest Boko Haram attack in Nigeria. Ethiopia's parliament approves an extra year in office for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. And Kenya reviews its response to COVID-19 pandemic as the number of confirmed cases increases steadily. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here for the latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. Egypt agrees to return to the negotiating table over the Grand Renaissance Dam that Ethiopia is building. And the World Bank is warning that Tanzania's economy is headed for a sharp contraction in 2020. We'll be taking a look at those numbers and plenty more in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thanks, Rama. We'll see you in a bit. Well, a Boko Haram attack has killed at least 69 people in northern Nigeria. Gunmen attacked the village of Faduma Kolaram, located in the country's Borno state. Witnesses say the gunmen razed the village to the ground. They also allegedly stole over 1,000 cattle and camels. For years, Nigeria's military has been fighting against Boko Haram militants. The group's attacks have displaced millions in the country's northeast. At least 20 African migrants have lost their lives after their dinghy capsized off Tunisia. The boat was reportedly carrying more than 50 people. The migrants had set out over the weekend aiming to reach Italy. Coast Guard units and the army are still searching for those who are still missing. Well, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's term has been extended by a year. Ethiopia's parliament approved this on Wednesday. This comes after the Prime Minister postponed the planned August elections. The extension comes as the country continues to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Authorities say the elections will take place when health experts determine that the coronavirus is no longer a public health threat. The former Speaker of Ethiopia's upper house and a leading opposition politician resigned on Monday. Pierre Ibrahim's resignation came after the government announced its plan to postpone the August elections. Kenya is reviewing its response to the COVID-19 pandemic as the number of confirmed cases increases across the country. President Nkurunziza held a meeting with local officials as it emerged that scores of health workers had been infected. CGTN's Robert Nagila brings us that report.
A meeting called by the president on Wednesday with Kenya's 47 governors reviewed the country's protocols on COVID-19. The government's released $50 million to help counties increase their capacity against the virus.
We need to secure, during this particular period, an undertaking that every county should be able to deliver at least 300 beds in your isolation facilities.
There are concerns over the rising number of COVID-19 cases among health workers as the total number of positive cases in the country crossed the 3,000 mark. More than half the COVID-19 cases reported Tuesday were health workers.
72 frontline healthcare workers have contracted the virus from different environments.
Experts say health workers are exposed to hazards that put them at high risk of infection.
At the isolation facility, the most common known cause of transmission is when you are donning off, when you are removing the Atman suit.
And there are fears that the rising COVID-19 cases could overwhelm the health system if not contained. According to a report by the Kenya Medical Association, healthcare utilization in the country will peak around February 2021, with over 300,000 beds and over 100,000 ventilators required within that period. Already, the country's border with Uganda has witnessed a spike in cases in recent weeks, mostly from truck drivers. The president has made it clear the economy needs to be reopened, but only if the country is able to flatten the curve. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia has hailed Chinese President Xi Jinping for the great leadership role he's played in fighting the coronavirus. The Ethiopian Prime Minister made the remarks while addressing the country's parliament. CGTN's Gurum Chala has more.
According to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, the Chinese government has provided every protection necessary to Ethiopian students during the COVID-19 outbreak. And as a result, none of the 400-plus Ethiopian students in China caught the virus. That is why Abiy said President Xi Jinping deserves praise.
At the beginning, the president of China had promised us that an Ethiopian won't die before a Chinese national. Ethiopians won't be hurt before Chinese. He said to be, we shall protect them as VIPs and keep them safe. President Xi deserves the utmost gratitude. Not a single Ethiopian student has been affected by the coronavirus. Not even one. Thanks to the president, they have received the highest care.
Ethiopia was one of few countries in the world which continued business relations with China after the coronavirus outbreak. Ethiopian Airlines, for instance, had no single flight cancelled to China at the height of the pandemic. Abiy Ahmed, in his parliament address, told MPs Ethiopia's commitment to China during the COVID-19 difficult times has paid off.
Because we didn't stop flying to China despite the odds, China today has allowed Ethiopian Airlines to fly from its territories at least 90 times a week. The airline is conducting flights from China to Brazil, Europe and Africa. The airline has been supported in cash too by China. This all because China has explicitly said the airline has been working with us during the tough times, and we do the same now.
Ethiopia's Prime Minister has also sent out a message to fellow African nations saying it is always important to seriously consider all that is at stake before deciding to isolate a partner country.
Rushed decisions have affected many countries eventually, especially African nations. We could have decided wrong just because of what has been said on CNN and BBC, but decisions which disregard the existing situation of a country cause danger, always.
Many experts say the Ethio-China relationship has been tested further and proved to be one of the best due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Addis Ababa stood by Beijing at the beginning of the outbreak, and China provided all the support available, including testing kits to Ethiopia after the virus hit the Eastern African nation. A pure example of friends indeed are friends in need. Gurum Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The recent publishing of China's white paper on actions aimed at fighting the coronavirus continues to get positive reactions. The chairman of the Rwanda-China Alumni Organization says China has contributed a great deal to the global fight against COVID-19 by donating medical supplies to various African countries. He also welcomed China's white paper, saying it had shown the Asian economic giant's commitment to completely eradicating the virus from the world.
All countries should learn from China, and the good thing is that until today, China still believes that as long as all countries unite and cooperate to mount a collective response, the international community will succeed in overcoming the pandemic. Chinese government's policy and strategy to defeat this pandemic is commendable to all other countries, and efforts should be put together. China has embarked to support any country in fighting against this COVID-19, and this is a war that humanity has to fight and win together. And I can say that it's true, China is in action.
In Ghana, a local company, Incas Diagnostics, is expecting approval for its rapid COVID-19 antibody test kit. And as CGTN's Noel Mwakugo reports, the test could help health authorities plan the easing of pandemic restrictions.
Ghana's Incas Diagnostics has developed a cheap, rapid testing kit for COVID-19. If approved by the Food and Drug Administration next month, it will complement a tracking app developed by the same company. The company says its kits could help health authorities ease pandemic restrictions.
The utility of the antibody test is in public health decision making, it's in looking at the extent of spread, it's in looking at who has been exposed, and it's looking at making an antibody map of the various communities, various countries, various cities, to be able to know when and how to ease restrictions to ease the various restrictions that have been put in place by the various governments in different countries.
With support from the World Health Organization, the company will partner with developers in Nigeria, Cameroon, South Africa, and Senegal. Together, they will create a mobile app that will trace people potentially at high risk of getting the virus.
The app can also be used without a rapid test because basically it's able to give you the various components, whether somebody is high risk, somebody is medium risk or low risk. So when the person is low risk, the person can move around. Medium risk, the person you are closely monitoring the person.
Ghana has reported one of the highest numbers of COVID-19 cases in Africa, with more than 10,000 infections. The government has begun a phased easing of restrictions to curb the spread of the virus and plans to reopen schools and universities from June 15th. Noel Makugu, CGTN.
A young doctor has traveled from Britain to her Somali motherland, where she's doing her best to help with the country's COVID-19 outbreak. Operating from the country's COVID call center, she keeps her fellow citizens informed on the disease. CGTN's Asatal has more.
Last year, Jihan made her first trip to Somalia. The trip was a somber one, as she had traveled to bury her father. A year later, she's still in the country, now using her expertise at Mogadishu's COVID-19 call center.
We advise them and tell them what the COVID actually is and the symptoms related to COVID, people who actually have the symptoms, and then we give them advice to isolate themselves and stay away from their family members and in crowds.
Initially, Jihad had stayed in Somalia to get in touch with her roots. Her colleagues at the COVID-19 call center have not only appreciated her expertise, but her curiosity as well.
Jihan is a really happy person. She always wants to know more about her country. She has only been here a short while and the culture is new to her, and she likes to be introduced to new people and faces. She doesn't care if you are a boy or a girl. She likes to be everyone's friend and always wants to help people.
While she has enjoyed getting to learn more about her culture, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has affected her as well.
I know some people personally that have died or have known of people that have died of COVID, and it's unfortunate, but this disease does not discriminate. It will take lives anywhere you are in the world.
As the number of COVID-19 cases rise in Somalia, doctors like Jihan are on hand to help their country. Astatal, CGTN.
Time for us to take a short break and return. We have details on the latest efforts to curb the spread of a new Ebola outbreak in the DRC. The European Union asks warring sides in Libya to cease all military activities.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Chinese President Xi Jinping on Tuesday inspected the city of Yinchuan during a trip to northwest China's Ningxia-Hui Autonomous Region. The president visited a rural ecotourism park and a vineyard near the Helan Mountains to learn about the development of local agriculture, tourism, and efforts in strengthening the ecological conservation of the mountains. Later, during a meeting with officials of the Ningxia-Hui Autonomous Region, President Xi pushed to promote high-quality development and speed up economic restructuring. He urged for policies that reduce the tax burden on companies and boost consumption. Xi also said he wanted new breakthroughs in reform and opening up by cultivating a market with full competition. He stressed efforts to secure a decisive victory in building a moderately prosperous society in all respects, which included eradicating poverty. Elsewhere, the European Union's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, is urging all conflicting parties in Libya to immediately stop all military operations and engage constructively in peace negotiations. In a joint statement with the foreign ministers of Germany, France, and Italy that was issued on Tuesday, Borrell has asked Libyan conflicting parties to swiftly agree on a ceasefire and withdraw all foreign forces, mercenaries, and military equipment. Germany is also pushing for a political solution to the Libya crisis. Earlier this week, German Chancellor Angela Merkel discussed the situation in Libya with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. The Democratic Republic of Congo and international aid agencies have put in place a 4-month plan to tackle a new Ebola outbreak in the northwest of that country. The plan entails tracing people who've come into contact with Ebola patients and vaccinating them to prevent the spread of the disease. 8 people have already died of Ebola so far. CGTN's Chris Mringa has more.
DRC's health minister presides over a meeting in the northwestern town of Mbandaka to lay strategies of ending the new Ebola outbreak. 12 people have been infected with the disease since the outbreak was reported on 1st June. The World Health Organization says 8 of them have since died. The government and international health organizations have stepped up their efforts to contain the outbreak.
We have packed all the medical supplies that we will need to treat Ebola patients in the Bikoro health zone. We are working closely with other health partners to tackle this new outbreak.
The new Ebola outbreak has occurred at a time that the country is battling the world's worst measles epidemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and another Ebola outbreak in eastern DRC.
Health experts have found no link between the new Ebola outbreak in Mbandaka with the one in the east of the country. They believe the new outbreak was transmitted to humans from animals. Now the government and international partners have agreed to scale up their efforts to contain it by putting together $16 million towards the response.
More than 600 people have been vaccinated in Mbandaka and Wangata health zones so far. Some community members have joined the fight against the outbreak.
We have cases of Ebola in our area, so we keep telling people to observe the health guidelines and report anyone with symptoms of the disease to health workers. We are determined to end this outbreak.
We have been educating people here about this new Ebola outbreak voluntarily. We have no megaphone and no means of transport to travel around. We are making the sacrifice for the good of our community.
Mbandaka was hit by another Ebola outbreak in 2018 that left 33 people dead. Officials say the disease was contained in 3 months because of the collaboration between the community and health workers. The outbreak in eastern DRC occurred in a conflict zone and has dragged on for almost 2 years. But health workers at the epicenter in Beni have gone for 42 days without recording a new case. They hope to declare that outbreak over on 25th June if no new cases are reported. Chris Mringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The African Union has sent its condolences to the people of Burundi following the death of their outgoing president, Pierre Nkurunziza. The president passed away on Tuesday. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi has more.
Under President Pierre Nkurunziza, Burundi was instrumental in pacifying Somalia. It has the second largest contingent, comprising more than 5,000 troops within the African mission to Somalia, AMISOM. But Nkurunziza's leadership also remained in the focus of the AU Peace and Security Council. In 2015, the fallen leader attempted to take up a third term of presidency, which the African Union considered illegal. The AU refused to send an election observation mission to Burundi, but Nkurunziza went ahead with the elections, which he won. The proposal by the AU Peace and Security Council to send 5,000 troops under the African Prevention and Protection Mission into Burundi did not get support from African leaders in 2016. His leadership was also criticized for human rights violations by the African Union and the United Nations. Nkurunziza was rare at the African Union summits, mostly sending representatives, but his impact was still felt. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, here's CGTN's Noel Makugu with an analysis of Pierre Nkurunziza's legacy in Burundi.
For a man his age, Pierre Nkurunziza achieved what many in Africa might never live to fulfill. He was one of the youngest presidents on the continent and one who would have gone into history books among the youngest retired presidents. Having known this, Nkurunziza crafted his exit from political scene by ensuring his continued role in the running of the Central African nation after his exit. But the hand of fate did turn his dreams into lasting silence in an unexpected death, a death that is attributed to cardiac arrest. His entry into politics was informed by a horrifying experience in 1995 when hundreds of his students from the Tutsi tribe were killed by Hutu radicals. Burundi had descended into civil war after the assassination of Melchior Ndadaye, its first democratically elected president. It was one of the many episodes to bedevil the nation since independence. Before this, Burundi endured 10 years of military rule under Michel Mikombero, whose repressive regime bred a genocide in which over 100,000 Hutus were killed. He was from the Tutsi community. His troubled rule was followed by a violent period in which several presidents were assassinated in military coups. The civil war in Burundi, which began in 1993 after the murder of President Melchior Ndadaye, proved to be a challenge to international negotiators, with the then respected South African President Nelson Mandela playing a leading role in trying to resolve the impasse. After the 1995 incident, Nkurunziza would later join the then rebel movement, National Council for the Defense of Democracy Forces, CNDD-FDD, where he rose through the ranks to be its Secretary General. A fallout in the party saw him lead a faction that later signed a peace deal and was later incorporated into the transitional government in 2003 under the then President Domitien Ndayizeye. He would later be elected president by parliament. Although Burundi is still emerging from its dark shadows of its bloody civil war, Nkurunziza played a big role in its political stability. Under his watch, the country has enjoyed relative peace and regional acceptance. Pierre Nkurunziza led his nation into pushing for the integration into the regional East African community. Being of mixed Hutu and Tutsi ethnicities, Nkurunziza has been instrumental in bridging the political gap between the two communities that have been at odds for decades. Even now, politics in Burundi is largely centered around the two biggest tribes. However, the rosy side of Nkurunziza comes with a painful thorn beneath it. He has been accused by local opposition leaders of being repressive. His decision to seek a third term in 2005 plunged Burundi into political crisis. He would survive an attempted coup later by Godfred Nyombare. He was also accused of isolating the nation by pulling out of the Rome Statute that created the International Criminal Court by clamping down on opposition groups. There are also claims that his security forces committed acts of torture on dissidents. He has always denied repressive and torture allegations. His government has also been at loggerheads with neighboring Uganda, a country with a shared history and culture with Burundi. When coronavirus was reported in early March 2020, at a time when Nkurunziza was campaigning for his chosen successor, Evariste Ndayishimiye, who later won the polls, he refused to call off the polls. Unfortunately, a close family member was reportedly evacuated to Nairobi after allegedly testing positive for the virus. In his retirement, Pierre Nkurunziza was to serve as Burundi's supreme guide, where the sitting president was meant to consult him on national unity and security. It was a new post created as he prepared to leave office. Pierre Nkurunziza, a politician, an avid football player, preacher, husband and father, died at the age of 55 years. Nomakugu, CGTN.
U.S. President Donald Trump has tweeted what is being called a conspiracy theory. The 75-year-old protester in Buffalo, who was seriously injured after being pushed by the police, belonged to the radical group Antifa. Republicans have blamed the group for violent protests. Jagruti Dave reports from Washington.
So this was an incident in Buffalo where 75-year-old Martin Gugino was protesting, and there's cell phone footage that was shot of the incident as he was faced with police officers, and they shoved him and he fell backwards and hit his head on the floor, and it's quite graphic footage that's gone viral. You can see blood coming out of his ear. Now, on Tuesday morning, President Trump tweeted saying that, suggesting that this man was an Antifa provocateur, saying that he fell harder than he was pushed. He asked in this tweet, could it be a setup? And he repeated the conspiracy theory that is unsubstantiated, that Martin Gugino was scanning the police communications to black out equipment. Now, reaction to this tweet has been one of disbelief and from many quarters. The Democrats have condemned it. One person who's spoken out quite soon after this tweet was New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo, who said that the president should apologize for what he said. Let's just listen to a little of what Andrew Cuomo said.
Fell harder than he was pushed. What do you think it was? It was staged? You think the blood coming out of his head was staged? Is that what you're saying? You saw his head hit the pavement. You see blood on the pavement. Maybe he fell harder than he was pushed. How reckless, how irresponsible, how mean, how crude.
People who say they've known Martin Gugino have been speaking to the press, and they've reacted as well. And they say that he is a peace activist, a Catholic peace activist, and not an Antifa provocateur, as the president has suggested. So on Capitol Hill, Republicans have generally tried to avoid answering any questions that have been put to them about this incident. Some Republicans have expressed disbelief. Lisa Murkowski, one Republican who has occasionally expressed her views about the president publicly. But one Republican who has been very vocal in his criticism of President Trump was Mitt Romney. And he said that what the president tweeted was shocking.
In Richmond, Virginia, protesters tore down the statue of Christopher Columbus, set it on fire, and then threw it into a lake. It was the first statue of the explorer erected in the South. Columbus is credited as one of the first Europeans to come to the Americas, but Native American advocates say he spurred centuries of genocide against indigenous people. The death of George Floyd has sparked a movement to remove statues commemorating slave traders and colonizers across the world. In Senegal, protesters in Dakar have joined the worldwide protest denouncing police violence and remembering George Floyd. A small number of demonstrators knelt at the site that was designated for a giant monument at Gorée Island. The monument will serve as a memorial for the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. Back in 2013, former U.S. President Barack Obama had visited the site. George Floyd's death sparked protests in several African countries.
On the site we have come to kneel in the memory of George Floyd is the site of the Gorée Memorial. This symbol is very powerful because in front of you there is the sea. You are in front of America. If the tide was low, we could walk to America. We would be there tonight or tomorrow morning and we would be by George Floyd's side.
I would love to be there at this moment to protest, but I'm very happy about what's happening here. It's very meaningful to see that people care. We have a lot of allies everywhere and all over the world, and it's very beautiful. You know, I feel like my brother is being supported. A lot of people see other people being supported, and I feel like a lot of people see themselves in this issue, and they can express themselves through George Floyd. And I wish I was there, but being here and doing what I can do is still equal.
Floods triggered by torrential rains are paralyzing large parts of southern China, affecting millions of people in 9 provinces. Authorities say total economic losses are expected to surpass 4 billion yuan. At least 6 people have been killed and 1 is missing in the Guangxi Autonomous Region. In central Hunan province, 7 people are dead and 1 is missing. Tim Ilrich has more.
Villages underwater, houses destroyed, children and the elderly trapped. The strongest downpour this year has hit most parts of southern China, affecting over 2.6 million people in 11 provinces. Starting last Tuesday, 110 rivers have seen water levels rising to dangerous levels, and more than 1,300 houses have been destroyed. In Shuangjai village in the Guangxi Autonomous Region, over 3,000 people were trapped when the flood hit, cutting off access to the outside world. Armed police had to go door to door to evacuate residents to safety.
It's the worst flood our county has experienced since 1994. Armed police dispatched a team and brought us relief supplies.
The floods destroyed roads and disrupted power supplies, affecting 80,000 households in the Guangxi city of Guilin. But local authorities were able to repair most of the facilities within a day.
We have resumed power supply to 14 main lines. We cannot start repair work for the other 2 branch lines due to interrupted transportation.
Authorities have allocated disaster relief supplies to the worst affected regions. They've also deployed crews to head off further flooding, activating early warning and emergency response mechanisms. All these measures will be put to the test as more heavy rain is expected for several days to come. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Food security continues to be a pressing issue around the world amid the current COVID-19 pandemic. CGTN's Asta Tal has more on how the United Nations experts are raising the alarm on a potential crisis.
The UN has issued a dire warning. If countries do not act to shore up the global food supply, nearly 50 million people could fall into extreme poverty.
Clearly, it's important to recognize that food security is essential for our economy. The scale of the scope of the food economy measured as people is 4.5 billion of 7.8 billion on Earth. So nearly 1/3 of whom are exposed to disproportionate risk. So it's a huge part of our population that are at risk.
The current COVID-19 pandemic has affected global food supply chains.
COVID is compounding already a bad situation to begin with. For us, what is really important is to make sure that we are able to reach people who are in worst possible states even before COVID came.
The UN has proposed that countries deem food and nutrition services as essential while scaling up support for food production. It also proposed scaling up support for transport and keeping trade corridors open to ensure that food systems can keep operating. The implementation of protections for those working in the sector was also suggested.
Our food systems are failing, and the COVID-19 pandemic is making things worse. Unless immediate action is taken, it is increasingly clear that there is an impending global food emergency that could have long-term impacts on hundreds of millions of children and adults. Even in countries with abundant food, we see risks of disruptions in the food supply chain. We need to act now to avoid the worst impacts of our efforts to control the pandemic.
Guterres also urged for a more sustainable approach to the global food supply chain. Asta Tal, CGTN.
Well, before we go to a short break, we're going to hand over to Rama for the latest in business.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. Egypt agrees to return to talks over the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. And the World Bank is warning that Tanzania's economy is headed for a pretty sharp contraction. The numbers coming up next.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start with Egypt. The North African state has agreed to resume talks with the Ethiopian government on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi headed a meeting with the country's National Security Council to discuss developments regarding that particular infrastructure project. This comes in the wake of a formal invitation to the talks from Sudan. In a statement, Egypt confirmed that it had gotten that invitation from Sudan's Minister of Irrigation, but they insisted on proper timelines to avoid what they describe as Ethiopia's attempt to employ delaying tactics. Egypt says that these new phase of talks should not become a new tool at Ethiopia's disposal to hinder reaching an agreement. Negotiations over this dam were suspended back in February after Ethiopia refused to sign a draft agreement prepared by the United States and the World Bank. On the other end of the continent, the South African shopping mall operator Hyprop Investments is getting a bit of confidence back as outlets are reopening and customers are slowly getting back after more than 2 months of lockdown. The firm says that rent collections are now increasing. Non-food brick-and-mortar retailers were among the worst hit by a government order to close all stores in a bid to prevent the rapid spread of COVID-19. Retailers were allowed to resume operations from the 1st of May, but human traffic is still relatively low. Hyprop collected about 43% of rent for the month of April and 54% of collections due for May. The company owns the upmarket Hyde Park Corner Mall and Rosebank Mall in Joburg. It says it's currently in talks with 86 of its national and larger retailer groups across South Africa. On to East Africa now. The World Bank is forecasting a pretty sharp decline in Tanzania's economic output this year due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Preliminary estimates show that the contraction could potentially push some 500,000 Tanzanians below the poverty line. In the 14th Tanzania Economic Update, the World Bank says that although the country witnessed a solid 6.9% growth rate last year, the GDP, the economic output rather, growth rate will drop to about 2.5% in 2020. Tourism was a key factor in that strong performance last year. The sector generated more than 25% of the total foreign currency earnings in the country. Two operators in the sector anticipate an 80% contraction in total revenues, with mild recoveries expected next year. The COVID-19 pandemic has triggered border closures, an international travel ban, and measures as well designed to curb the spread of the virus that have battered the country's tourism sector. In the world of commodities, the oil giant BP has announced plans to cut 10,000 jobs worldwide. It's citing a global decline in demand for oil and oil products because of the pandemic. According to the company's CEO, Bernard Looney, the oil price has plunged well below the level they need to essentially turn a profit. Staff will be able to apply for voluntary redundancy with effect from mid-June. Countries right around the world have ordered people to stay indoors and not travel or minimize travel as much as they can, and that in turn has caused a big decline in demand for oil. Brent crude futures, the global benchmark for oil prices, at least on one end of the market, hit the lowest level in decades back in April. Prices fell below $20 a barrel, less than a third of the $66 it cost at the start of the year. It has since then partly recovered to just under $42 a barrel. Another European oil major, Royal Dutch Shell, is said to be offering voluntary redundancies in a bid to become a much leaner operation. The global aviation industry is also having its worst year on record. The International Air Transport Association, or IATA as it's more commonly known, has predicted that airlines are set to lose $84 billion this year. Carriers are now counting the cost of lost business, a debt pile swollen by bailouts, and a diminished demand outlook. The Director General of IATA said that every day this year will add $230 million to industry losses as a whole. He also urged governments to take measures to help the industry take off.
The point now is we should restart quickly. We are ready. The processes are ready. The airlines are ready. We are expecting governments now to be, fast and pushy to reopen borders. Of course, with all the necessary health controls, sanitary check, precautions, we have no problem with that. Huh? But things are ready. Methodology are ready. Equipments are ready. Airlines are ready. People are trained. We should fly again.
That's one side of the aviation sector. Let's look at the manufacturers now. The French government has announced a bailout package for the country's aerospace industry. It's one of the sectors worst hit by the pandemic. Here's CGTN's Stéphane de Vries with the latest from Paris.
On Tuesday, France launched an ambitious rescue program for its aerospace industry worth 15 billion euros, or almost 17 billion US dollars. About 100,000 jobs were directly at stake due to the coronavirus crisis travel slump.
Les aéroports de France, d'Europe.
Ports in France, Europe, and around the world closed. Global traffic was reduced to a bare minimum. Repatriation flights, 80 or 90% of aircraft orders were delayed. This morning we are declaring a state of emergency to save our aeronautical sector, to make it more competitive and less reliant on carbon in the 21st century.
Nous décrétons donc ce matin l'état d'urgence pour sauver notre industrie aéronautique.
France wants its national and European aircraft industry to stay competitive with those belonging to the world's other big economies.
Nous devons sauver notre industrie aéronautique.
We need to save our aeronautical industry. We need to avoid giving any ground in the coming months to the US giant Boeing and to the Chinese giant Comac. We will not leave the global aerospace market to China and the United States. France and Europe will keep its share.
Mondiale se partager entre la Chine et les États-Unis, la France et l'Europe y garderont leur place.
The 15 billion euro package includes 7 billion euros of aid already announced for Air France KLM and acceleration of existing orders of Airbus tankers and other military kit. Stéphane de Vries, CGTN, Paris.
In Uganda, tour operators are deeply worried about the impact that COVID-19 is having. They're concerned that this pandemic could essentially edge them out of business altogether. They say the pandemic is keeping visitors away from the country's tourist attractions, and they are deeply uncertain on when their businesses can even resume. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga filed this report.
Amos Wekesa is a tour operator in Uganda. He says his business has slowed down due to COVID-19.
At least 80 of my staff have gotten letters to go on forced leave, really. And it's sad. It's not their problem, but again, you can't be spending when you're not earning. So we stopped earning in February as a business.
The Uganda government has also imposed flight restrictions. Traveling to border districts is not allowed. Curfew and lodges are still closed for at least a month. This is affecting the tourism industry.
Hotel bookings have just dropped off like a cliff, like dropping off a cliff. Air travel has dropped considerably. So we expect revenues to drop, but our costs are still high.
Tour operators are now pushing for a stimulus package from the government, and the government has responded positively.
Allow corporations, including small and medium-sized enterprises, to delay payment of corporation tax or presumptive tax for taxes due between April and June 20, and for tourism, manufacturing, horticulture and floriculture to defer until September 2020.
The Uganda government earned $2 billion in tourism revenue in 2017, up from $1.7 billion in 2016. But with the outbreak of COVID-19, they are uncertain about meeting their targets. Local authorities believe the country could lose $1.6 billion in tourism earnings after the pandemic. The International Monetary Fund has also projected that Uganda's tourism earnings could fall by 54% in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Tour operators believe that a stimulus package from government will help the industry recover. But with many countries opening up and airlines beginning to fly, they hope for a quicker return to business towards the end of the year. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Nigeria is currently experiencing a shortage in supply of smartphones and smartphone accessories. Due to this pandemic, smartphone shipments to Africa's largest economy, in fact, fell by over 15% in the first quarter. A further decline of about 4% is forecast for the second quarter of the year. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with all the details.
Prince Johnson has spent the past 7 years building his mobile phones and accessories business in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. He imports products mainly from China and Dubai, but shipments have stalled since the coronavirus outbreak. This in spite of rising demands.
It's been very difficult to get goods, even though sometimes when you make order from China, from Hong Kong, from Dubai, to receive it will become a problem. Most people receive their goods from for Mina right now, but before we can get goods in 2 days, 3 days. You make order between 3 days, 3 days, you leave China, you get it in Nigeria. But now 2 weeks plus before you can be able to have access to it. Most customers will be calling for products, but there's no product to sell to them. Trade the tradition. Some customers call for a particular thing we don't have. If you give them option the one you have, this is not actually what they want.
Statistics from the International Data Corporation show over 15% fall in smartphone shipments. Consumers are now feeling the impact of this shortage as products are either unavailable or more expensive.
I came here to change my phone screen. I came at first, they said they were low on stock. They had to just fix one for me. And on getting home, I said that this has an issue. I had to come back again to check if they now have a new supply. But they said due to COVID-19, they've not received their new stock. So I still have to come back again. So it's really not been easy at all, getting accessories, phones and everything. And prices have really shot up due to COVID-19.
Nigeria relies on importation to serve its growing mobile gadgets community. Smartphone imports stood at 2.9 million units in the fourth quarter of 2019, making Nigeria the leading African market with the highest number of smartphone imports. About 85% of phones and accessories are imported from China, and many here worry that the situation may be exacerbated by the falling local currency and inflationary pressures. Kelechi Emekalam, CGT and Abuja, Nigeria.
I'll leave it there for the time being. Ahead on Global Business, however, we'll be looking at South Africa. The business confidence levels there have hit levels we've not seen really since the mid-1970s. What exactly is going on and how do we get that confidence back into the system? We'll explore that live from Johannesburg at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Rama. Looking forward to that. We're going to take a short break and return. Egypt's film industry turns to digital platforms as COVID-19 closes theaters. Thank you.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Egypt's film industry is the biggest in the Arab world, but under the current pandemic, it's been suffering as movie theaters remain shut. While filmmakers are in negotiations with the government to open theaters under specific preventative measures, they're also seeking other options to show their movies. Here is Adel Al-Marouchi with more.
The coronavirus pandemic has completely shut all movie theaters in Egypt, which has for decades been the main source of revenues for movie productions. Egypt has 3 main cinema seasons annually. COVID-19 has deprived the industry from 2 of them.
When theaters were closed, we lost our Eid and summer seasons. This has created a big problem. Producers couldn't release new films and cinema owners couldn't open the gates. We now have shelved movies and several films in post-production were not finished.
But while this crisis has made the industry bleed millions of dollars, some filmmakers have been seeking to market their movies in new ways. Digital platforms have been the salvation to some producers.
Filmmakers are not seeing actual losses. They have unreleased productions, which are assets that will still generate revenues once premiered. That has become an opportunity for digital platforms, which are now buying movies or even producing. So we are seeing movie premieres now are on these internet-based services rather than on theaters. Digital is booming, and now there are more people watching online.
To decrease losses, we are seeing filmmakers producing low-budget movies to sell it on online platforms. But the blockbusters cannot follow that lead until cinemas are open.
Representatives of the cinema industry are negotiating terms of reopening theaters with the government. While the guidelines for their operation are not final yet, they will definitely include a cap to theaters' capacity. That will lead to a significant drop in revenues from cinemas.
Digital platforms in Egypt are still developing, so their financial gains are quite limited, especially to blockbusters which have high production cost. It's why many producers want to wait until cinemas are partially open, so at least they can combine their revenues from both traditional and digital screening opportunities. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Time for us to take a short break and return your sport news, including former South African rugby star Brian Habana tackles hunger in Cape Town.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Time now for your sport news. We start in South Africa, where rugby star Brian Habana has been a busy man since retiring from rugby in 2018. He launched his foundation, started several businesses, including its latest venture called Match Kit. During this time of the pandemic, Habana is now also working at alleviating hunger brought on by the pandemic in and around Cape Town.
World Cup winning winger Brian Habana has had his hands full in the last 11 weeks, and while launching a new business, the fleet-footed former World Player of the Year has been tackling hunger by using his foundation to provide food parcels to the Cape Town residents in desperate need.
I think you sort of sometimes feel that you're only a drop in the ocean because the need is so vast, but that first hands-on experience, being able to see the appreciation from people that potentially haven't eaten for a day or two, or potentially didn't know where their next meal was coming from, now being able to receive a food parcel. And I think as South Africans, as humans, we all have that responsibility to try and play our part.
The former Toulon player, who spent 3 seasons in France, believes the changes in South African rugby could work both ways, in that it provides many overseas-based players with a chance to return home, while for others a chance in a lifetime to experience a new culture and play rugby in a new country.
I think each and every individual situation is unique. The uncertainty that surrounds this pandemic and what it brings to light is potentially what you see as valuable. And if that is being close to your family and friends, that's being close to your support structure, then yes. But also a lot of players are seeing the benefits of, being embraced and immersed in a very different culture, learning more about themselves, not only as rugby players.
The 36-year-old, who boasts 67 international tries, believes the visit of the British and Irish Lions next year will be a massive boost for rugby in the country and provide the Rainbow Nation with something to get excited about once again.
It is without a doubt a spectacular rugby, and I think one of the unique traditions that I really hope is going to be there for all of eternity, because as a player, probably one of the you probably get 2 pinnacles, I think, in rugby, and the Lions series and the World Cup are the 2 for me.
The 119-cap veteran who scored a decisive try in the second test against the Lions to secure the series believes the return 12 years later for a historic game at the iconic stadium behind me is going to be a spectacle to witness, and that the series will uplift the nation currently grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic. It will give renewed hope to a country that needs to experience that feel-good factor as they did just last year when the men in green and gold celebrated a third World Cup triumph. CS du Plessis, CGTN, Johannesburg.
To England now, where a friendly match between Manchester United and Stoke City has been called off after Stoke manager